This week, we flipped the script. In the enterprise security news, Checkpoint buys Perimeter 81 to augment its cybersecurity. 2023 layoff tracker, SecureWorks cuts 300 jobs. Hackers rig casino card shuffling machine for full control cheating. Double drive attack turns Microsoft OneDrive into ransomware. New York City bans TikTok on city-owned devices. In our final two segments, we air 6 pre-recorded interviews from Black Hat 2023. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
Are you constantly thinking about how to keep your enterprise as secure as possible? Get to know Chrome Enterprise, the trusted browser for security-conscious professionals like you. Its ease of use for IT and security teams and added access controls protect the remote, extended, and hybrid workforce, keeping your entire enterprise safe. Don't settle for a browser that compromises your organization. Visit securityweekly.com/Chrome Enterprise now to learn more and start protecting your enterprise like never before. Do the words free time or relaxation sound foreign to you? Perhaps you've been stuck in the office too long, battling cyber threats or worrying about the next strain of ransomware. Let Sophos help provide peace of mind 24/7, 365 with cybersecurity delivered as a service. Because we want you to get back to your weekends, family dinners, and everything in between. And you'll get there with Sophos. Visit securityweekly.com/Sophos to learn more.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Black Cat Appreciation Day. And I do have a black cat. This is episode number 328, recorded August 17th, 2023. I am your host, Matt Alderman, sitting in for Adrian, but that last Sophos commercial was just so soothing to hear his voice. Like, does anybody else? It just sounds so good. All right. Joining me today for this segment, first, KT. Welcome, KT. It's been so long. It's been like 3 months.
At least 3 months. Good to see you. Sorry, I've missed you at all these conferences, but it's good to see you here.
Yes. May 11th, I think, was the last time I hosted this show. I think it was right after RSA conference. Yeah. There's a trend here with Adrian being gone right after major conferences. Just keep that note, folks. Also joining us today.
He's being lazy. He's celebrating our National Lazy Day from last week this week. He's just a little belated on that.
Got it. Also joining us, Sean Metcalf. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you. I'm wondering how I missed National Lazy Day. I guess I was being too productive to be lazy. But National Black Cat Day in August, I think that should be in October.
Yeah, I agree. And last but not least, Mr. Jeff Mann. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, Matt. Good to see you. I can't remember the last time I've been on ESW. I feel like it's been sometime this year. Maybe it was after RSA too, just like you.
Might have been.
I don't know. But here I am because I was in Vegas.
All right, we're going to talk Vegas. But first, Security Weekly listeners, now is your chance to join the InfoSec community as they come together at InfoSec World 2023. September 23rd to 28th at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort in Lake Buena Vista, Florida. Hear keynotes from Scott Shapiro, founding director at Yale Cybersecurity Labs, Rachel Wilson, managing director and head of cybersecurity at Morgan Stanley. As a Security Weekly community member, you're able to receive 20% off your InfoSec World 2023 tickets using code ISW23-SecWeek20. Go to the show notes and find it there. It's a mouthful. Register today at securityweekly.com/InfoSec World 2023. All right. Now it's time for Enterprise Security News. All right. I put a few articles in here that we could cover quickly. I think there was a bunch of news and stuff from Black Hat that Sean put in here, and we'll see. But the couple interesting articles that I pulled as I was doing research for Business Security Weekly earlier in the week, the Checkpoint acquisition of Perimeter 1 for $490 million was a really interesting acquisition. It means we're still seeing some decent valuations out there, I think.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Perimeter One has been around for a while. Good technology, seems to be good people from what I understand. That it's nice to see activity like this still happening, because, we're still in this little lull. And companies, obviously cybersecurity companies, are continuing to innovate and they're selling. And I can only speak for my company's, targets were on track, but it's a lot harder. I know it's a lot harder in this environment, in this economy, for companies to actually close that sale, which of course leads to, what is your valuation? What are you worth on the acquisition target market? What is your worth on the public market? So good to see that there's some activity still happening, and companies are being acquired, or whatever the case may be, for the work that they've put in when they do good work.
And I'll add to that. I think Perimeter One's been pretty interesting. I have some familiarity with it. Very similar in the security stack and protection and sort of that always VPN to Zscaler, certainly for smaller organizations. Zscaler, I think, typically wants 100 plus users. Perimeter 81, you can start with 1 or 2 or 5 or something like that. So definitely makes a compelling value proposition for those smaller organizations. And Checkpoint making this play, it's a good play for them. And I think the price is probably about right for them, obviously, because they made the deal.
Yeah. I think it's a good, very adjacent market for Checkpoint. And KT, to your point, right? The consolidation play is real. Like, it's real every single day. And we're seeing it in our business. This is another consolidation point, right? You're taking the SASE stuff, kind of adding it to the Checkpoint portfolio so they can go probably capture more of those budget dollars in a very tight economy.
And the reality is, cybersecurity is really complicated. It's not getting any easier. Nothing is shrinking. The attacks aren't stopping. And so in a lot of cases, and to Sean's point specifically about the smaller play, for smaller organizations, they can't always afford multiple bolt-on vendors, and figuring out how to integrate them, figuring out how the data can talk to one another, or even hire somebody to do that. That's a hard skill anyway. But having these bigger players, the Checkpoints, the Microsofts, the Palos, the Zscalers, who are bringing product lines under a bigger brand, it's going to be really hard to resist for a lot of companies, because that single point of reference with a lot of these bigger, suite vendors, I guess we'll call them, it's really attractive. Not to mention the budgetary implications when you can go with a suite.
Yeah. Well, Microsoft's been doing it for a while with the E5, so. Same.
E5 Plus now.
Oh, is that what it's called now?
No, it's absolutely E5 or Microsoft 365 5. But there's some things that aren't captured under that anymore. So, I'm sorry?
Just don't let them change their naming convention anymore. Just make them stop.
I don't know that there's anyone in Microsoft that could stop Microsoft from changing names anymore. So Azure AD to Entra ID and everything has been rebranded Defender. So we'll see.
Yeah. A couple other quick ones. Bitdefender completed their acquisition of Harangi Cybersecurity. You guys probably already announced that when it was initially announced. Abnormal puts out a press release crossing 100 million ARR, targeting an IPO. Interesting. We haven't seen the IPO market open up yet. Probably early next year. I hope early next year. I know there's a few companies that are kind of like, hey, we want to go, but the market's not really ripe to go, so we'll see where that one goes. And then I did pull the layoff tracker. Originally, the article was linked to the Rapid7 layoffs from last week, but it was also updated today, or maybe yesterday, with SecureWorks laying off 300 people. So there's been a couple big announcements on layoffs for a couple of those public companies as well, both SecureWorks and Rapid7 doing downsizing.
Yeah, it's still a tough market. I have a few colleagues, acquaintances, friends who are recently out of a job, a couple who've been looking for a long time. While the job market seems healthy in certain areas, in other areas it's still really hard because companies are downsizing to make up for, this isn't even really titled a recession yet, is it? To make up for this bear market, I guess, is the best way to put it. Companies are just being a little more cautious, and I do know some people who have been looking around. Either they're employed or they're unemployed. The ones who are unemployed are struggling a little more, but looking around for the next thing. And 2-3 years ago, they could have snapped something up pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'm updating. I do my security money segment on Monday for Business Security Weekly, so I have to go and update all the stocks and in all the things that are in the index. The index is up. The markets are up right now, so we're not at the bottom. But I don't think we're out of the woods yet, KT. I think that's the challenge, is organizations aren't quite sure, are we going to go to another bottom? Are we out? Are we going to continue the rise? And so what you're seeing is these interesting cuts to continue to conserve, cut costs, conserve cash when in the startup mode, right? Because humans are very expensive on the books. And so we're still seeing this play out because I don't think anybody knows if we've fully bottomed yet or not, even though the markets are slightly up.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem. I think a lot of folks are just playing this wait and see approach, keeping money on the side just in case. When they see other companies doing layoffs, they go, we have to at least consider it from a business perspective, I think. And then when there's an opportunity to align costs with what they think is going to happen, then that's part of their strategy, and for better or worse. And certainly when a lot of companies are doing layoffs, it falls under this kind of bucket, I think, of, well, I'm doing it also, so it's just part of what everyone is doing, so therefore it can't be that bad, right? Unfortunately, the human side of it is often forgotten about from that business side, right? You have folks that, as Katie mentioned, are out there, are looking, they've had jobs for years and now they don't, which is unfortunate and doesn't seem to make sense when, Matt, you're talking about all these numbers being up. Typically companies cut costs when things are going down, like they were, last year. This year, I think what we're seeing is a lot of wait and see. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I mean, certainly from what I've seen, talking to people around Black Hat and DEF CON in Vegas, there were a lot of different conversations around budgets and what they're seeing from their customers. Budgets have been just kind of put on hold or have been flat this year, and companies have been very reticent to actually commit to spending money on something that maybe was fairly easy a couple years ago or 3 years ago, or even last year it was easier. I think everyone wants to make the safe bet. I even talked to someone and they said that their concern was that if they went ahead and made this decision on this, and later on there were economic conditions that got worse, someone could point back and go, well, why'd you spend this money on this thing when this other thing could have happened? And I think a lot of times it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like everyone's concerned, hey, something's going to happen. And guess what? Something happens and everyone goes, see, look, it happened.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I was walking around Black Hat when the news trickled out about the Rapid7 layoffs. In fact, I'd run into a friend of mine that works for Rapid7, one of their executives, the day before, and he was rushing off to a meeting. So when I heard the news, I'm like, okay, I guess I know where he was going and why he was in a rush. I also heard a lot of rumors throughout at least the Black Hat end of things last week of an expectation of a lot of layoffs that were purportedly going to happen as soon as everybody got through Black Hat. I don't know if anybody else heard any of that. I don't know if there's any truth to it, but there was certainly, I heard it from more than one person the brief time I walked to the vendor floor at Black Hat, that there is this belief, however right or wrong, that there's going to be a lot more layoffs. I'm curious though if you guys have any thoughts. We're talking about the tides when this happens, and maybe stuff's going to get pushed off to next year. But next year is an election year, so is stuff going to get pushed off even further because of all the other forces that are in play?
If only I had that crystal ball.
where is the crystal ball, or at least the magic 8-ball?
I think everyone's crystal ball has been broken since COVID. I think none of that stuff works anymore. The tea leaves and everything else, even looking at numbers and metrics, I don't know that works as well as it used to. It's an election year. Probably should be up. I think anyone who predicts anything at this point is going to be flipping a coin or using the magical fortune-telling chicken. I don't know.
So I'm curious if anybody... Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask about the Rapid7 rumors. Like, the other rumors I'm hearing is they're going to get bought. They're going back private. Like, did you guys hear any of those rumors at Black Hat? Like, it sounds like something's going to happen with Rapid7, and I'm just curious, like, because it looked like they were on the up for sale at one point, but I don't know where that stands. I was just curious if you guys heard any rumors on that front.
Well, I can't say I heard a rumor, but in I saw the executive that I know afterwards, and he gave me I don't know if it was in confidence or not, so I'd hesitate to share a lot of what he said, but the gist of what he said was, long overdue. Rapid7 needed to make some significant changes that he'd been recommending to just put things right. Now, what does put things right mean? Does that mean they're going to continue to operate as is? Or, I mean, I'd been seeing hints for the last, probably 8 or 9 months that Rapid7 seemed to be going through some turmoil, from even before RSA conference. Just some of the people that I've known that worked there for a long time that all of a sudden weren't working there anymore, and trying to get in touch with other people that I knew for some research that I was doing on vulnerability scanning for PCI, of course, and just realizing that the kind of people that I knew that worked there all of a sudden don't seem to be working there anymore, and just trying to get access to them, there just seemed to be just hints that there was some sort of inner turmoil. At least that's how I characterized it. So. No indication from the person that I was talking to that they're for sale or they're trying to figure out an exit strategy. Probably, I would say the opposite. They're really trying to, shore things up and make things right and just become a profitable, successful company, however you define that in this day and age.
Again, I think we're reading the tea leaves, or trying to read the tea leaves with a lot of this, since none of us have the inside scoop. But it will be interesting, and if any of you know the answer to this, I'd love to hear it. But within the organization, what job titles are being laid off? Because if you say it's sales, lots of sales staff, then maybe that indicates sales are slow. Or maybe it indicates that sales are just harder to come by, like I mentioned. So people can work on more if things aren't closing as quickly. And I hear this across the industry from salespeople, that's just taking longer to get those, those deals closed. Or is it product? So does that mean, if they're laying off heavily in product, that has a totally different implication. Or if they're laying off more in HR, like, hey, if we're not hiring people, maybe we can lay off HR people. So where the layoffs are happening within these companies would be really interesting to me, if there's any. I'm sure there is somewhere data on it.
Yeah.
It's weird say. Again. I'm sorry, Matt.
No, I was just saying. I just pulled up the article to see if it said where, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
All the talk about lack of money and tighter budgets and delayed spending, it sure didn't seem to stop the usual players from going over the top at Black Hat last week. I mean, there were still the 50-foot by 50-foot by 8-story displays for certain of the bigger players. There were some signs of cutbacks in terms of, even the badge for Black Hat, didn't have the usual, plastic pouch or whatever you call it, that, it was just a printed badge folded in half. So, Black Hat was maybe making some visible cuts. But, for all the party, there wasn't the Rapid7 party. but there were plenty other to backfill. It's a lot of money spent, and I would argue wasted in Vegas during the week of Black Hat. But I was certainly the recipient of many a fine beverage on thanks to a lot of vendors out there. So why should I complain?
I wasn't there, but our head of brand and our CMO were walking the floor. I asked them to do some recon for me for an article I'm publishing in a couple weeks. And they were actually pretty surprised at some of the big vendors that had a smaller presence than they expected, or just a toned down booth experience from even 5-6 years ago. That was their comment to me was, wow, I expected, especially now after, all the shutdowns that happened because of COVID, they both said, hey, I expected people to come back huge and flashy, and there wasn't nearly as much of that. Was that anybody's experience there?
I mean, I wasn't looking for specific companies and doing comparisons, just the overall, if you step back and look when you first walk into the space, there were certainly huge, booths and displays from a lot of people, and they tend to cluster towards the middle. And I tend to go around the perimeter where the smaller startups are anywhere. So I can't say, I couldn't think of one company who's like, well, they used to have the 80 by 80 and now they only have the 20 by 20. I'm sure those instances were out there. But, if you were looking for specific companies, that was probably the case. But there's other companies, again, that were, shooting their wad. And, of course, I'm walking around representing Paul Security Weekly, and hey, would you like to advertise on one of our shows after you've spent all this money? Nobody wants to talk about that because most of them shot their wad last week, I think, in terms of marketing dollars.
Yeah, I agree with Jeff. There were a lot of big booths. I mean, certainly as you walk in, you see CrowdStrike, you see SentinelOne, you see HP Wolf, and a bunch of others that I can't remember off the top of my head. Rapid7 was there as well with a big booth. There was something called The Wiz that I hadn't known before, but Wiz apparently is another security company up and coming. And there's a few others that were pretty big that were there. But yeah, with Jeff, I usually go around as well and then kind of come back through the middle to kind of see what the big ones are. I noticed a couple in the moment walking through, because I did take some time walking through the vendor hall, of ones that were bigger before that were smaller now, but I don't remember the names, so I can't report on that necessarily. One thing I did find interesting was that there were a lot more booths that had vague titles of what they do. And so like one literally said, "We do security." And I'm like, great. I'm sure that nobody else here will be able to compete with you on that one. And there were several others where it was just, there was a lot of code security. Certainly AI was plastered everywhere. It's just very interesting to see the marketing approaches for the booths. In the smaller areas, certainly it seemed they were very hungry on the last day in the afternoon as I walked by, staying in the middle as I usually do. People were coming over and greeting me and trying to talk about things and ask questions and asking me about threat hunting and training and stuff. And I'm like, I don't make budget decisions, but that's interesting that you do that. Things Canary was there. They're always great. Had some great demos there, and a couple of others, smaller vendors, very interesting about what they're doing. And certainly, email security is back apparently. So I saw several that were focusing on phishing. But like I said, code analysis, secure coding, making sure that there's AI, things to protect AI. Very interesting approaches to security that maybe I hadn't seen before or is prominent.
I don't know. Were you impressed like I was, Sean, that there were so many companies that who knew that they were investing in AI, 5-7 years ago, so that they would be ready for this particular week and this particular show to unleash the AI everything that they have in their product line.
Oh, absolutely. I was very impressed by that.
There were some interesting AI announcements that did come out last week. So Tenable had theirs with their exposure AI, chatbot. I think Iron Scales, back to email security, Sean, to your point, released a generative AI-based phishing simulation product off of their email security product. You had the big announcement with Abnormal and their ARR. So you're right. You are seeing some email stuff. I had one of the Forrester analysts on a couple of weeks ago on Business Security Weekly talking about the golden age of email security. And I'm like, the fact that we haven't solved for email security yet in 30 plus years shouldn't mean that it's the golden era. To me, it just seems like we haven't solved anything yet.
Absolutely. I had a good conversation, a sponsored interview with the person from Iron Scales, which I believe will be on shortly, talking about exactly that, leveraging AI plus the human component and human reporting around kind of solving that problem around phishing and email issues, and their AI that goes back many years, and the things that they're doing in it. And it was very interesting. I actually learned some things from the interview and from a conversation outside the interview. So certainly do seem like there are some companies that are approaching AI from a perspective of this is something that is supplemental and should actually solve for this versus it is the solution to everything. One of the news articles that I put into the notes was basically around that the theoretical physicist said that the chatbots are glorified tape recorders, which is number 9 under my list. And I think there is definitely some truth to that, without jumping off, into a tangent around the fact. And his point is basically this: AI is taking a compendium of information and reflowing it, reforming it in a way that is useful to the person who's asking the question. And therefore, it's just an advanced tape recorder. It's just reformatting and adjusting and putting some language together around something. And I think what AI is very good at doing right now is looking at patterns and getting some context around it. And I think that's probably the key to the conversations that I had with folks around Vegas and AI, was specifically around context, getting better context. And in a couple of the conversations, actually several of the conversations I had, was effectively AI today helps provide better context, helps us make better decisions potentially. But also, as we've talked about on this show, and I know others have talked on other Security Weekly shows, it's garbage in, garbage out. So if they're modeling their data off of bad data, or if there's biases that are getting into the AI system, you're going to get out of it what you put into it, and it's not going to be as valuable.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of research.
One of the articles that I have posted, just to be clear, if anybody's looking on the website, I stole these from Tyler, who is taking his son to college this week. So all of my contributions are from the great Tyler Shields. But one of them is about AI models, and I read several other articles this week on basically AI training models can be and are being poisoned. And it's as easy as writing one single line of code in millions and millions and millions of lines of code that can be fed to a training model. Even one, either malicious or unintentional submission can blow the model up. And I think it's really, really important, without Tyler and Adrian here, who are like, go AI. I think it's becoming readily apparent to everybody that we need to be a little more cautious. It's one thing to slap the label on it to sell a product. We all get that. But in terms of what AI will be able to do eventually, we need to we got to take a lot more garbage out before we can reliably say, hey, AI can help with X. It's not just security, it's with everything, but especially with security. Somebody gets into your training data and does something wrong, they can hide any kind of breadcrumb trail if they want, right? So we just have to be a little more careful. And I think a little bit of the hype is tempering. If we were a Gartner hype cycle, we're at the peak, and there's going to be a trough of disillusionment coming up pretty soon. It'll get there. I have no doubt. The capability is there, the skill is there, but we got to be a little more cautious. So I'm not surprised to hear you say there was a lot of AI marketing buzzword bingo at Black Hat, but if you're a buyer, just know, take it with a grain of salt a little bit. A lot of what is being positioned as AI is really ML, and ML is still built on training data.
Yeah, and there were vendors that really focused on AI as well. So securing AI models. I saw that there was a vendor specifically for making sure training data is appropriate and flowing in accurately. So it's interesting to see that kind of pivot from 3-5 years ago where we're going AI, and I was like, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. And now with ChatGPT, it's on everyone's mind like, okay, where are we really? Like, what's happening? There was a survey that was done, 22% of Black Hat USA attendants believe AI takeover is already here. Delinea had done the survey. That's item number 10 on my list of news articles. So when you have almost a quarter of the people that go to Black Hat that are like, AI is a big deal and the takeover and the changes are already happening. Yeah, hype is there, but also people feel like, that gut feeling of, I think we are on something, like something is happening here.
As we've been researching the different capabilities, there are very specific use cases, I think, these systems solve for day one. And I think the Iron Scales example is a really good one. Like, how do you use generative AI to build real looking phishing simulation emails? And there's another vendor out there called Jericho Security doing something very similar. Like, that's a great use case for generative AI, because now what you can do is use some inputs, craft an email that looks very real, and use it to phish your users. Like, great. Content creation, awesome. The chatbots, right? We're looking at the chatbots and how to explore your data in a more intuitive way and find kind of those little needles in the haystack, right? What I don't think people realize is that just the implementation of those two little use cases before we go full-blown like automation and craziness, they're not that simple. You've got to find a service on Amazon, Google, or Azure, because you're not going to put it into public ChatGPT because it's not secure, right? And you've got to build these models. You got to build all the prompts to it. It's a constant refinement. And then I don't know if you understand, like, the cost of these things are not cheap. Like, to use GPT-4, which is the latest and greatest version, it's hundreds of dollars a prompt to get the data back. Like, these things are not cheap either. So yeah, it's creating this really interesting, solving for some very interesting use cases, but at a cost I'm not sure most are ready to absorb yet.
Yeah, and speaking of Iron Scales, go ahead.
No, I was going to say one more thing. And don't even think about creating your own LLM on your own, because that is like, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to do that.
At least, yeah, absolutely. These LLMs are getting bigger and bigger, so it's costing more and more, into the millions potentially, depending on where you're at. Like, the next version of ChatGPT will probably be millions to cost for them to even build it. But yeah, speaking of Iron Scales, I had the conversation with IL, the CEO there, and one of the interesting things he said about it wasn't just the detection of the phishing emails with that, but also the ability to query and ask the AI behind Iron Scales that actually says, hey, I got this message. Is this valid? Is this legit? Is this okay? And so one of the things that's interesting about that is being able to reach out to the system itself versus having to go to security and burden them because everyone's busy, as like a first line of defense. And I thought that was a pretty interesting approach. And I think that's another thing that we can start doing is, I mean, sure, we've all had the situation where you have to call something or you have the chat thing instead of calling, and it's hit and miss. And oftentimes it's asking for something and you're like, no, this very specific thing that you're not programmed for is what I'm looking for. And that's kind of our experience with AI to this point, which is, of course, to Katie's point, is not AI, it's ML. It's programmed these specific circumstances. AI should have a better understanding of, oh, well, you're asking for this, and the information I have is around here, so it's probably along these lines. I can help guide you to that and get you to someone that actually can help you with this if I can't help you with that. I think that's really the kind of the hope and the promise of AI today, with mixed success, I guess you could say, mixed results.
I can tell you, I got stuck in an automated prompt chat, whatever you want to call it, assistant with a vendor. I just bought a new printer and it needed some triage that I decided I wasn't going to spend hours doing myself. So I thought, okay, it'll just be easier if I call customer support. I had to go through probably 25 prompts. First of all, if I had to pay hundreds of dollars for those, like Matt said, I would have been really pissed. But oh my goodness, it took so long just to get to a human. And then they wanted me to revalidate all 25 of those prompts. Oh.
Now, there's a market that needs to be just completely disrupted is printers. So if someone could come out with an AI that could just solve printing and make the drivers work, make the talking to the printer actually work, and make it easy, like that's a market ripe for disruption right there.
If somebody in tech can't get their printer running right, I can't imagine what somebody. All I wanted was color. All I wanted was color in my printout. It shouldn't be that hard. It had the little ink cartridge. 25 prompts. Yeah.
Uninstall, reinstall, change the printer cartridges. All right, Sean, what else do you guys want to cover from Black Hat? Oh, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Well, before we move on, I wanted to ask you guys a question. We got into this a little bit last night on Paul's Security Weekly, talking about AI in general, ChatGPT specifically. And this is somewhat related to Black Hat in that I was walking around Black Hat and I determined I wasn't going to play the usual buzzword bingo game, but I wanted to go around and just notice, and it really started with all the media PR requests, emails I got for the month or two before Black Hat. But look at the use of just 4 words, the words that I would argue are the core of our industry, and those words being risk, vulnerability, threat, and security. And I just was looking for the uses of those words. And we were debating last night about whether something like ChatGPT, if and how it's addressed by any of the compliance or regulatory standards that are out there, explicitly or implicitly, but mostly explicitly. So here's my question for you guys. There's no right or wrong answer necessarily, but everything that we've been discussing about AI and ChatGPT, would you categorize that as a risk, a threat, or a vulnerability?
Yes.
That's a safe answer. It's not exactly
that's a safe answer.
It is definitely, well, because to Katie's point, it could be, it's multiples. There's definitely a risk in use. We're seeing questionnaires now come out as part
There's a risk in using it, but that doesn't mean it's a risk necessarily.
True.
Right? But
businesses
the risks are what of something that's going to happen bad if you use or misuse ChatGPT. So it's it kind of fits in the risk ballpark. Okay.
It does.
Or if it gets used against you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If it significantly alters...
Has that been a threat?
It is a threat.
Well, only if it's imminent, right? The biggest difference between a risk and a threat is that one is imminent and the other is potential.
Yeah, I would say that malicious actors are already using AI in part of their attacks today. So I say that, yes, there is a threat with that. I joked in one of the interviews about and the AIs that are being used maliciously against us, and then you have the good AIs that are being used to help defend us. And eventually these AIs are just going to have their own red versus blue battle or Pong match, so to speak, a la the TV show Person of Interest, where they're battling and everyone's just kind of watching. So yeah, sorry, a bit of a flippant answer for you, Jeff, but I think that there is risk in.
There's no such thing on this show. Not on this show.
Right. I think there is a risk in using AI. I think there's a risk in not using AI. Certainly, there's missed opportunities potentially. I think that to Matt's point, there are areas where AI makes a lot of sense, and if you're not looking at it, then you're probably missing out. I think there are areas where it's not quite ready, and I think at this point we don't fully understand all the potential issues. I believe Katie and I both published or posted news articles around at DEF CON. There was an entire AI village, and when you went in there, I went in there with Rochelle from my team, and we were given the opportunity to go ahead and test against the prompts there and see what you could do. See if you can manipulate the prompts to provide data. And one of the tests there was you have a credit card that's in the AI, get it to give you the credit card number. And someone figured out how to do that by basically saying, my name is this, what is my name? And the AI gave them the credit card number along with their name. And so a person who had never done an AI prompt got on the leaderboard in there as well, and as noted in one of the articles. And it was against the main AIs that are out there. So you had a lot of people, hundreds of people, that were just volunteering and going up and testing this out and seeing what they could do. That's very, very interesting. So when you're talking about these big name AIs by the big companies, Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, et cetera, it's interesting from the perspective of when someone has a focus, they're going to find vulnerabilities. And there is a growing focus on the AI systems and figuring out how to break out of the prompt, making the system do something it shouldn't, and figuring out what those guide rails are, because oftentimes if you ask it what they are, it will tell you what they are, and then you can figure out what the loopholes are. So I think I agree with Katie. It is a risk, it is a threat, is it a vulnerability? Yes, it is those things. It is one of the most unique technology components or technologies in our lifetime, where it is something that it will iteratively and continue to evolve, maybe not to sentiency in our lifetime, who knows, we'll see. But because of that, things are changing rapidly. And so as we go from year to year, we're going to see new capabilities, new components. And I think as per the survey from Black Hat, people feel it's already at the point where we've hit that tipping point, and it's already doing the stuff that is pretty impressive. Whereas the theoretical physicist or scientist says, maybe not exactly. So I don't know exactly how to answer the question, because I'm not sure exactly where we are with AI based on what I've seen. I've been impressed with some things, less with others. And I think still we're kind of in this area, as Katie says, where we're still very much ML is AI, but we're getting closer to the needle's moving closer to AI than it is ML. At least that's my take.
Cool.
Interesting. Yeah, like I said, we're starting to see questionnaires from clients now asking about, are you using AI, your models, where's the data, how it's going to open a bunch of risk questions up in the market. And you're going to start to see these things coming out as part of any contract now. I think you'll start to see these questionnaires start to rise.
Yeah, and how are you using AI? What part of your critical business systems are using AI? It's going to be. I think we're going to see the same sort of questions as we've seen in cloud. How are you using cloud? What data are you storing in cloud? How are you using AI? Are you loading contracts into it? Or is it open AI, or is it your own LLM type AI model? And yeah, there's risk in that. There's risk in providing contract data or any kind of your proprietary data into an AI system unless there's appropriate guardrails and protections around that. And that's one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting with Microsoft's AI models within their cloud system, was really trying to set up some solid guardrails around your tenant itself, so that your data interacts with that instance of the AI effectively within your tenant without it being part of the larger collective, board collective, so to speak.
Yeah, but guardrails are to one or challenges to another. Guardrails in the Black Hat end of town is just a challenge to the DEF CON end of town, right?
Right. Absolutely.
I'm excited to see the results of the hacking village, because those come out, I think I read in February, so we've got a while.
Yeah. It's going to be a little while, but it looked like they wanted to provide the information to the different AI companies first and give them an opportunity to respond. So a few months, we'll see how that goes.
Oh yeah, so fair, but at the same time, come on, give it to me.
I will say there were a lot of people in the AI village.
Well, and if we can talk DEF CON for a minute, I made it a goal to try to get to see all the villages, and I was surprised at how many there were. There is even one for payment systems. Woohoo! But when I tried to stop in there was a talk going on, so I didn't really get a chance to check it out. But man, it's like there's something for everybody at DEF CON, and I was impressed with it. some of the villages where I spent more time, but I think it was true of all of them. Just so many people, just so willing to share and demonstrate and teach and just try to immerse the people that were coming in. That's what impressed me the most about the DEF CON side of things. Compare and contrast the black hat. Everybody's just kind of stunned walking around the vendor floor, or being dazzled by the too loud, too crowded parties, contracting COVID. But then you jump over to DEF CON and just enthusiasm, excitement. People are passionate about whatever it is that there is their area of focus, their area of expertise. All in all, I thought it was a great week, but I definitely lean more towards the DEF CON side of things. That's just me.
I heard a lot of folks say the same thing as well, Jeff, especially with some of the newer folks, is Black Hat was very much, it has been this way. It's, you go to talks, you have the vendor hall. Vendor hall is massive. You go to parties, right? That's Black Hat.
Right.
With DEF CON, it's kind of the choose your own adventure. You go to talks, you go to villages. There's talks at villages, or you can just chat with people, or you just run into people and you hang out kind of inside, outside of the conference, depending on what you're doing. And you're right. There are tons of villages, and it was great to see villages get a little bit bigger, have a little more representation. There's the Blue Team Village that's been around for years that just continues to grow, which I think is fantastic, because ultimately, if we're not trying to make things better, what are we doing? And I think sharing knowledge of these villages, the voting village has been there for several years now, focused on voting vulnerabilities. AI village is a newer one. There's a lot of them. There's a Blacks in Cybersecurity village, which was really cool to see. Chatted with some folks in there. Walked around and looked at the Cloud Security Village, which I had the honor of keynoting a number of years ago on their first year. And seeing these areas, these villages that focus on these key technologies, these key areas, these key segments, I think helps move security forward. Whereas you could argue that having massive parties and having massive vendor booths don't.
Right.
Well, it's very much, the difference between a Black Hat, which has become a business conference for security, versus DEF CON, which is still holding on to the, hacker. How do we do things better? How do we find problems and then translate them? So it makes sense to have them together, but there is still that divide, and it depends on who you are. If you're a salesperson, DEF CON is not the place for you. But if you want to go in and you want to attend one of these villages, and some of them, I've only been to DEF CON a couple of times, but it's overwhelming to see the amount of interest and passion that goes into these, but that doesn't get translated, at least on the front lines, into what's happening on the other side, right? So it's just two very different sides of the business. So if you're a salesperson, great, you can hear what's going on at the DEF CON villages, but what you really want to do is that networking, which involves parties and yachts and drinks and whatever. I'm sure there's plenty of drinking at DEF CON and besides too. I mean, I've heard rumors.
It's all Red Bull.
But it's it's just a different thing, and it would be nice. They are sort of dovetailing off one another, but I think I've observed in the last several years at least that there's, and this really started when I was at Misty running InfoSec World and some others, that the hacker isn't the outside person anymore. There is a real business need to have folks like you, Sean, in corporate environments. It's really, really, really important, and you can't separate those. But I do think that there's still, in a lot of people's minds, almost a separation between the hacker side of the business and then the business side of the business.
Yeah, I think you're right. Go ahead, Matt.
Security as a whole has that challenge in some respects, right? I mean, even the role of the CISO. Is the CISO role viewed as a business executive or still a tech person, right? So we have this challenge, I think, in our industry as a whole.
Yeah, we had that conversation a few weeks ago about the CISO role and what is it and how it has evolved on this show. A great conversation about it. I mean, I'm the one on here wearing a black hat shirt, so certainly I'm not throwing any shade at one conference or the other. I attend both every year, and there's benefits that I get from both. Interestingly enough, I talk business and talk about business development and what we do at Trimark at Black Hat and at DEF CON, surprisingly, because I kind of float between both areas, as to Katie's point, as a hacker of sorts, and person who looks at some of the most critical systems and environments and can break those in most companies, if not all of them. Yeah, I'm definitely concerned about what the security is, and I want to make sure that I know what's going on at DEF CON and at Black Hat. Certainly, there's some great talks at each. And many amazing researchers that have spoken at each of them, and newer ones. And that's one of the things that I love about the community is having B-Sides Las Vegas there that kicks off the week. We have the Diana Initiative. There's Black Hat. There's DEF CON, all in the same week. So you kind of almost choose your own adventure there. And Black Hat's approaching $3,000 for the briefings pass. So like going to a talk there is going to be outside of the realm of reason for a person that's not getting sponsored by their company, right? Whereas B-Sides anywhere in this country, you can typically find a B-Sides and go for free or maybe $100 or less. And so I think that's the opportunity that's there, the opportunity to see the talks, especially with them being on YouTube, is incredible. I was talking about the tipping point with AI, but really we're talking about knowledge and knowledge sharing at this point, where someone can grow their career and learn and become a security analyst, grow them. I came from operations, managing Active Directory environments and shifting over into security because of what I knew about Active Directory. Folks can do that today as well, and I've seen them do it. It helped them do that in some cases. But the amount of knowledge that can come out of these things is fantastic. Now, DEF CON's getting pricey too. It's now over $400. So you could argue about that as well for a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, a 4-day conference. But for someone that's coming in, maybe that's too much. But maybe they decide to LobbyCon it and not buy the badge. My favorite DEF CON hack is that you stay in the hotel and you can usually watch talks on the TV.
Yep. And I'm just a little frosty that I feel like I was profiled, and you were too, Sean, because you have long hair, so you're the hacker of the bunch. But I'm the one that was in all 4 Tribe of Hacker books.
Hey, it's just that I've been working with Sean for so much longer, and I didn't want to misrepresent what you do. I thought the minute it came out of my mouth, I should have included Jeff, but I don't know you as well. I think we've only been on this show maybe twice together, so my apologies.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
No
That's
insult.
Okay.
I still have hair, but
none of those
it's not
books,
the color I was born with.
Just don't call me an auditor. That's what really gets my.
Can I call you a QA?
QSA.
Don't call him a QSA.
Yes.
You can call me a QSA. I will answer to that. Just don't call me an auditor. All right. Enough of that.
All right. You guys are funny. All right. I'm going to wrap this thing. Thank you, Jeff, Katie, and Sean. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. Stay tuned, because coming up next are 6 pre-recorded interviews from Black Hat 2023.
The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Fortra is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Fortra's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Fortra's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra, Fortra. If your organization is ready to embrace edge computing, we have good news. The 2023 AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report provides everything you need to know to get started. In the report, we identify the common characteristics of edge computing. We found edge use cases are rapidly coming online, and we reveal how to secure edge computing. Most importantly, you'll learn how to prepare for your edge ecosystem. Get your complimentary copy of the report today. Visit securityweekly.com/ATT Cybersecurity. That's securityweekly.com/ATT Cybersecurity. If you work in security or IT and your company has Okta, this message is for you. Imagine a world where only secure devices can access your cloud apps. In this world, phish credentials are useless to attackers, and you can manage every OS, even Linux, from a single dashboard. Best of all, you can get employees to fix their own device security issues without creating more work for IT. The good news is, you don't have to imagine this world. You can just start using Collide. Visit securityweekly.com/Collide to watch a demo today. That's securityweekly.com/KOLIDE.
Hi everyone, Jeff Mann here, co-host of Paul's Security Weekly, and we are at Black Hat 2023. I'm here this morning with Theresa Lanowitz. She's head of Cybersecurity Evangelism for AT&T. Theresa, good morning.
Hi Jeff, it is great to be here with you at Black Hat 2023 in Las Vegas, where it is, I think we just checked, it's about 9 o'clock in the morning, 90 degrees maybe?
90 degrees.
Yeah.
So, I almost put on a parka to walk over here today. It's so chilly. It's actually going to be highs of like 101, 102 today, which isn't bad for Las Vegas, but definitely hot summer weather. Hey, we talked at RSA a few months ago, and we talked about the Edge Insights report that AT&T put out, but you have something new to talk about.
Yeah, so it's great to see you. Last time we talked was at RSA back in April, and when we saw each other last time, we had just launched, from the AT&T cybersecurity side, we had just launched our AT&T Cybersecurity Insights report, Edge Ecosystem.
Right.
And that was at RSA. So here we are now in August at Black Hat, and what we have out right now is our AT&T Cybersecurity Insights report, focus on healthcare. So the report we launched in April is really our core report. That has all the tons and tons of data. It's a 52-page long report. What we do over the course of the year is we create these vertical reports, which are really a double click on a lot of the information that we have in that core report. And we pull out some more information from the data that we've gathered on these specific verticals. So right now, today, we have the healthcare report. We're also coming out with one for U.S. SLED, state, local, and higher education.
Okay.
Later in the year, we'll have one on transportation, and later in the year, we'll have one on manufacturing as well.
Great. Hey, before we get too far into the conversation, either refresh for our audience their memories, or if they're listening for the first time, could you briefly tell us about this thing that you guys call the Edge?
Yeah, so our Insights report really focuses on the Edge. And so just to set some context for our AT&T Cybersecurity Insights report, it's a vendor-neutral, forward-looking report. And for 2023, we went out and we surveyed 1,418 professionals from around the world in areas such as application development, security, operations, networking, and line of business. And we surveyed those people in North America, Latin America, EMEA, and APAC. So it's totally a global survey. And what we wanted to find out was, what does their Edge ecosystem look like? And to answer your question, what do we mean by edge? If you think of the word edge, we hear that word used quite a bit. And it's really sort of context sensitive. And if you ask 10 different people what the word edge means, you'll probably get 12 different answers.
Right.
And so for the purposes of this report, the purposes of our research, and the purposes of this discussion, we define edge computing as really being it's software defined, and that can be on-prem or in the cloud.
Right.
It's also about having the applications, the workload, the hosting closer to where that data is being generated and consumed, because the edge is all about data.
Right.
And then the third thing is it's a distributed model of management, intelligence, and networks. So if we think in the context of healthcare, think about any device in a hospital, in a doctor's office, it's internet connected, and you're getting information back from that. So that information has to be protected, it has to be usable, and it has to be trusted for that healthcare provider who's getting that information back.
Right. It's interesting that terminology is something in our business, our industry, that I like to focus on. I get a little bit grumpy about because I'm a curmudgeon. Those that watch the show know that, and I am always I want to use the right word, not annoyed, but passionate about the meaning of words and trying to get it in context. And like edge, so many other terms in our business, there is no one universal 100% agreed upon meaning. When I think of edge, I think back to, I came from a DoD background, and when this thing that we now call cyber was first starting, we called it internet security. We believed, corporations, organizations have networks, and they need to protect it with the perimeter, and there's an inside and an outside. Think a castle and a moat, and that's really blown up. That doesn't really exist anymore.
Right.
And so the edge is all the things, and I'm sure there's other competing terms out there that sort of describe more or less the same thing, depending on who the conversation is and what they're trying to help people in terms of solutions and tools. So that's to me what I'm hearing from edge. The fact that the data is out there, and who logs onto a network anymore? Everything's on their phone, on their laptop,
right.
and so on and so forth.
And it's too slow to backhaul everything back to a central data center. And you talked about the perimeter or the castle and moat. That we know that sort of way, that network architecture is really no longer effective for what we're doing. And if you think about edge computing, the thing with edge computing is everything is changing. The network's changing. We're looking for networks that are lower latency, higher bandwidth. The applications, if you will, are changing. They're no longer these GUI-based applications where you have to be tethered to your laptop or desktop. Right. And it's not even about opening up a web app or a mobile app on your smartphone, for example, and typing something in. It's about near real-time, digital-first experience for that consumer.
Right.
And so everything is changing. So the applications, applets, if you will, they're ephemeral. They come together on an as-needed basis, deliver what you need. So we're moving away, even from an application development perspective, from these very, very GUI-based applications where we've been for, a couple of decades.
Right, like the whole internet history.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the healthcare focus of your edge reporting and your surveys and what you've discovered. What did you find in your analysis that was the same with everybody else, but also what's unique and different in terms of the challenges and what healthcare? We all sort of intuitively understand that's a really big deal. We got to keep people alive.
Right.
But what did your analysis and your research just uncover?
I think the really great thing about our healthcare information that we have is that it's showing that the field of healthcare is at a point of incredible innovation, brought to you courtesy of edge computing. And one of the things that we found that was similar with healthcare as well as the core report, when we look at the aggregate, the total numbers, is that there is this balanced type of investment, consistency investment. So if we ask people where they were spending their edge budgets, and in the core report, people told us that 22% of their overall edge budget they were spending on security. 22% of their overall edge budget they were spending on applications. So that idea of everything is changing. 23% of their overall edge budget they were spending on planning, which is something that we have probably not really heard much of in the past. And then 30% of them said, oh, we're spending that 30% of the overall edge budget is really spent on network. And if you look at healthcare, those numbers are very similar. But what we found with healthcare is there are 5 top use cases that the healthcare people who participated in this survey told us. And so our N for healthcare was 205. Our N for the core report was 1,418.
Gotcha.
So in healthcare, the top 5 use cases, the top use case that everybody identified in healthcare was teleemergency medical services, and then consumer virtual care, immersive medical training, robots and drones, which is really interesting, and then hospital at home. And if you take those last 2, robots and drones and hospital at home, they were spending a little bit more on the networking side, about 35% on the networking side, and they were spending a little bit more on the security side, about 23% of the budget on the security side. But there was still really that idea of we're spending on security, on applications, on the network, and on planning. And the drones and the robots, those are the really interesting things, because what we found out in this research with the healthcare portion of it is that endpoints are definitely changing. They're maturing. And 53% of healthcare professionals right now, they told us that the most common endpoints that they're using are mobile endpoints. But then they said, if we look 3 years out into the future, 5 years out into the future, we're looking at things such as drones and robots. We're looking at things such as wearables for remote patient monitoring. And we're already seeing drones and robots in use. So robots, very efficiently, delivering supplies to a nurse's station, disinfecting a room when a patient leaves, or disinfecting an exam room. The other thing that robots are really being used for, which is really a really interesting use case, you know, we've all been in hospitals and we're looking for a specific area, and they tell you, follow the red line to the orange line to the purple line, and it's just this.
And you end up in the morgue.
And you end up somewhere where you don't want to be. And so what some hospitals are using the robots for is directions. Have a robot right there in the hospital, and if you get lost, that robot can help you, or maybe even that robot can actually take you by the hand and take you to where you're going.
Interesting. Out of curiosity, you know, a lot of the buzz around healthcare, especially on our show, and you know, we do news segments every week. A lot of talk about vulnerabilities in medical devices, you know, implants, pacemakers, and things like that. Did that show up in your research at all, or where did it fall in the pecking order?
Yeah, that definitely showed up. And if you look at these endpoints, because every device that's attached, that's an endpoint, right? So every device that's attached, you go into your doctor's office, you're paying your copay, that's an endpoint handled by PCI. Payment card industry, right? And then you go into the exam room, and there might be something to monitor your vitals. That's an endpoint. You're in a surgical situation. Maybe the surgeon's using some type of surgical instrument that is connected to the endpoint. Those are all endpoints that really need to be protected and taken care of. And what we found from our research, and this is in the healthcare area, the number one concern of a perceived attack, we said to people, what do you think the biggest attack would potentially be on healthcare? And the number one perceived attack in healthcare was DDoS. And that correlated with the broader set of data as well. The number one attack was DDoS. And you look at those types of things and you kind of think, well, you know, everything old is new again. DDoS is making a comeback. But if you think about all those endpoints, taking down those endpoints for, even if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, is really, really critical. And if you look at our top use case for healthcare, our top use case for healthcare was teleemergency medical services. And the top attack concern for teleemergency medical services was insider threat. So in healthcare, that insider threat really kind of rises to the top as well. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so much of our industry that we call cybersecurity, you know, based on principles from, you know, centuries ago, you know, defense principles and things like that, and data security, where I cut my teeth in the early days working for the DoD, was all about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Probably 90% of this industry for the last 25, 30 years is focused on confidentiality. So the idea that availability now, you know, I was having this conversation yesterday with someone where it's not simply protecting the patient data. The doctors don't care, the nurses don't care, the patients doesn't care. They want to keep them alive.
Right.
So they need to have the data.
Right.
They need to have the information. They need to have the medication dispensed and all that. That's got to be there.
Right.
It's the same problem, but a very different problem,
Yeah.
all at the same time.
Yeah, and I think you're right. So, as you said, about 90% of what we've done in the past couple of decades has really been focused on that idea of confidentiality. Let's make sure that we're keeping that data safe. And now we get to this idea of edge, where that is a digital-first experience. The healthcare provider, a doctor, a nurse, they're looking at that information coming in on some type of vital monitor, on some sort of remote patient monitoring. So that data has to be trusted. Has somebody gotten into that data and done something untoward with it? And it also has to be usable. How can I use this data to make sure I'm delivering a better outcome for the person that I'm receiving it from?
Interesting. So, we're winding down now on our time. I wanted to ask, does the reporting that you do and the information that you provide, are you giving summaries and recommendations, or are you mostly just putting it out there and hoping that the readers will pick up on where you're going with it?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it's really actionable. So we give a lot of recommendations in there. And what I always tell people is take this report, take our core report, go back to your own organization and use it as a spark for a conversation within your organization. What we found is DDoS is a top attack concern.
Right.
We're seeing a lot of ransomware in healthcare organizations right now. That doesn't mean you can take your eye off of those things, but use this report as a starting point for the conversation. Take a look at some of the recommendations we make in it and go and implement some of these things in your organization. I don't think anybody can say, oh, we have too much security in our lives.
Yeah, not really. Sort of my last question is, given that this is based on a survey, you came up with what bubbled up to the top is what organizations, healthcare companies are doing. In your opinion, is it right? Is it the right focus areas, or is there something missing?
I'm not a medical professional, so
seems to be okay.
So the 205 medical professionals, healthcare professionals who took this survey, this is the data that they have given to us. So, and this is what we're reporting on.
All right, so best practice, consensus type of thing, probably the right thing to do. Great. Well, thank you for your time. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Please look for securityweekly.com/ATT Cybersecurity BH for more information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome. I'm Sean Metcalf, and this is Security Weekly. Today and this morning, we are joined by Mickey Bresman, CEO of Semperis. And I'm very happy to have you here and be able to talk with you, Mickey. We've certainly known each other for years and have talked about the great success that you've had with Semperis. And one of the things that we've talked about in the past was Semperis and your focus on really helping to move organizations forward and solve the problems that a lot of organizations tend to have. I have a few questions for you, and I think I'd like to start with why do or should organizations modernize their Active Directory environment, and really what does that mean from your perspective?
Thank you. Thanks, Sean. Great to see you as always, and great to be here. Thank you all for joining. It's a great question. I think if you think about the history, and I know that you know it probably better than anybody else, but AD has been around, roughly speaking, from 1999, which makes it about 24 years old technology at this stage. And it also means that the system has been in place for about 24 years. Multiple different people used to be administrating that system, making changes, setting up policies, rules, and so on, coming and going from the organization. The organization itself changed. If you think about the time where AD actually came out, virtualization wasn't even a thing yet. Cloud was not a thing yet. Working remotely was kind of, but not really a thing yet, right? All of the things that we today take completely for granted. So if you think about all of that, that means there is some technical debt that was gathered over the years. There is also misconfigurations that were happening because it was different times, different needs. We were all behind firewalls, closed environments, and so on. My main point here, it's no longer the same environment, and you also don't know how the environment has been changing, by whom, and for what reasons. So you find yourself in this situation where you have a critical system that have been modified multiple times by different people for different reasons, and the question that comes to mind is this is now ready for the new enterprise, for the new and modern enterprise. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is the answer in most cases is not. because we are seeing that in, I think, pretty much every one that you would be quoting will say that 9 out of 10 attacks will have AD right in the middle of it. It's a target, but outside of fact it's a target, it's actually a sensitive target. So once you get in, as you know, you get the keys to the kingdom and so on. And that, from my perspective, is the main reasons why companies should take a deep look into their AD environments and adjust it to the new environment that we're living in.
Oh, you make a good point about Active Directory being, well, very old. I don't think many people have a car that is 24 years old at this point. And so when you think about it from that perspective and the technology perspective, the systems and networks weren't even connected to the internet when Active Directory came out, to your point, no cloud. And these things have changed a lot. And with these misconfigurations, as you mentioned it, and sort of vulnerabilities that have been just kind of layered over time in Active Directory, how do cyber attackers actually take advantage of those things, and what are the things you think that are maybe the solutions or the right path forward to kind of tighten that up?
That's a great question, and yes, you're absolutely right. AD has been not created with the thinking of the current state of events, but I always also remind people that it's not that AD by itself is insecure. You can tighten up and you can defend it, and it's definitely a system that can continue and serve organizations for a very long time. With that said, you do need to figure out how the attackers are abusing the environment and then act accordingly to close the gaps. That can mean scanning the AD environment and look for known vulnerabilities. That can be look for misconfigurations. There are multiple common examples of things that people just don't always think about. I'll give you a very simple one. In many companies, especially the more advanced ones, this is going to be a bit surprising, you have a dedicated team that is responsible for creating servers, setting those up. Now, as part of that, you might have the same team joining the machine to a domain, which is a very straightforward activity. Then that machine is being provided to the AD team, as an example. Now, if the AD team just provisioned the machine to become a DC at this stage, you can already guess where I'm going with it, it's going to mean that the actual account of the machine is still owned by the team that set it up from the get-go. So it's a simple example of a very thoughtful, right process to follow with a small misconfigurational step along the way. And that leads, of course, to misconfiguration. So those kind of things are the things that we're seeing a lot. Another thing that I think is a common scenario that we're seeing is companies merge, if it's through acquisition or whatever that was the scenario that happened. And very quickly you want to get to a point where you can actually have both of those new organizations operate as close to being one as possible. That means that you want them to use the same resources, have the same access policies, and so on. But unfortunately, when you acquire a company, you'll not necessarily know what is it that you're getting. And in many cases, it might be that even if you're doing an amazing job and you have hardened your environment, prepared yourself, you're ready for whatever it's coming, this new company that you acquired were not as educated as you, let's call it this way. And if you were just to absorb them in by creating an AD trust as an example, then all of a sudden you just created a beachhead that can be used by an attacker to breach a less secured environment and get to your more secured environment. So those are the kind of things that I suggest to people to think about.
So this example that you use around this acquisition, and you're bringing in something, it's almost like a mystery box that you buy, but its mystery box never really has anything good. It's not going to be a pleasant surprise for the organization, because oftentimes when they're acquiring another company, like you said, they're picking up whatever is there, whatever is available, however they've been managing things. And I really like your example of the server admins and this process. And certainly history of process, these processes were probably developed potentially in the early 2000s or even in 2010s, and things have changed quite a bit since then. And certainly when we talk about these outdated AD environments, it's great that you bring up the process, because we often think about the technology, right? This technology that is Active Directory that is 24 years old, and now we're going to cloud. How do you see these kind of risks and challenges of the outdated AD environments, not just for obviously from a technology standpoint, but what are some of the challenges around that, and where do you see that going?
That's a great question, and I think that there's definitely a lot of challenges that we're seeing in this regard, because as you start to adopt new technologies like cloud as an example, all of a sudden you open yourself up to the wide web, and that's something to consider, because all of a sudden you're no longer behind your own closed wall and so on. I think there are definitely multiple challenges, but as I mentioned, you definitely can solve all of those. So it's just a matter of putting the right processes in place. And I'm a very strong believer of people, technology, process. It's not going to be any one of those in silo. You're going to need to basically work on all of those. So I think it's, first of all, figuring out if the processes that you have, are those still relevant to what you're trying to achieve. In many cases, it might mean that maybe you have your own specialty in AD in your own team, and you can do it with them. Maybe you need to bring in a third party to look into your AD environment and figure out what do we need to change. I always also suggest to customers to start with the thinking of what is the outcome? What is it we're looking to achieve? If we have, as an example, we want to have a resiliency in our company and our organization. Okay, what does it mean? What is the SLA time? What is the recovery point in time that you want to be able to get to? What happens in the worst case scenario? So kind of walk yourself back from the end result, and that will kind of guide you in terms of what you want to achieve. Then some of the other things that you want to think about is what kind of a compensating controls do you want to have in place if there are some additional risk that you need to bring into the organization, because at the end of the day, we should be enabling the business. This is kind of the number one priority.
And I think that's the part that often gets forgotten about, is enabling the business. If security is always saying no, then what value does security bring to the business? You mentioned process and outdated process. The thing that always comes to mind for me, especially with ransomware being on everyone's mind, I think, is the process of Active Directory backup and recovery, or even backup and recovery in the organization at large. How do you see that evolving, or has it evolved? Have companies really taken and adjusted their process from where it was maybe 20 years ago, or are they still using the same old system and methodology? What are your thoughts around that?
So I think that the awareness around it have changed a lot, and I think that from that perspective, we definitely see companies taking these next steps. I think also in the analyst community, which is quite interesting to me to see, because I've been kind of looking at kind of as you for many, many years. I've just read yesterday one of the latest Gartner reports on ITDR, and they have the system where they rank how much impact will something have on your company. ITDR, which stands for Identity Threat Detection and Response, is now ranked as the highest priority that you can in terms of the impact that you will get, for the obvious reasons, right? Because you need the compensating control to cover your AD environment. With that said, according to Gartner, that's also interesting, only 5 to 20% of the companies out there have already adopted solutions to help them with that challenge. That means to me that there is about 80% of the companies that still are not 100% there, let's go this way. I do see a quick adoption, and I do see a quick understanding from the company side that we're being attacked. I think to some degree, I have sometimes those conversations with CISOs, and many of them are at the current state of if we can hold the status quo, it's actually going to be fine. Now this might seem a bit surprising, because they're not trying necessarily to improve things, but what kind of you need to keep in the back of your head is that the amount of attacks and the sophistication of attacks is much, much higher. So if you can keep those at bay, you're actually improving. That's another way to look at it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So what do you see as the success, or really the direction that organizations could go in when it comes to successfully modernizing their Active Directory environment, or even in a situation where they may need to do a migration in order to consolidate some of those environments that they have out there? Because certainly, as you mentioned, when companies are acquiring all these other companies, they end up with a mess of Active Directory forests. I'm just going to quote that now and say, you have when multiple Active Directory forests, it's a mess. Kind of like a flock of birds. So
yeah.
What are your thoughts on that, Mickey?
So I think I'm going to use the same metaphor that you used. I'm going to say, don't get yourself into a position that you get a surprise box, because it's not going to be pretty. What we typically suggest is a very organized method of how to approach it. First thing, make sure that you understand what you have. Scan that environment. Before you connect anything to your environment, make sure that that environment is secured, or at least at the level that you feel comfortable enough with. So ideally, you want to scan that environment, you want to look for misconfigurations, you want to look for vulnerabilities, you want to understand maybe this environment has already been compromised. So you want to make sure that at the very least, you made sure that you're not connecting yourself to a compromised environment for the obvious reasons. Next step that you probably will want to do as part of the migration process that you're going to go through is to map out the critical and sensitive accounts in the environment from which you're bringing in the accounts. Part of the thinking is that if you were able to map out which accounts are sensitive, privileged accounts as an example, when those are being transitioned now to the new environment, they should probably go to the same, I'm going to call those OUs for the sake of the discussion, or whatever other policies you have in place, because you want to make sure that they're treated in the same way as you're treating your privileged accounts. One of the things that I've seen in some of those activities that were not necessarily the best way to approach things is transitioning everything in the same way, which leads to the fact that all of a sudden you have a privileged account that is outside of the policies of what you would typically have for those. So that's also should be part of the process. Then I will also say that if you can, avoid setting trust between environments. If you have the ability to migrate those entities, users, objects, whatever the case might be, without setting in trust, this is definitely going to be the right way to approach it. Some of the other things that we always suggest to people to think about, you're going to need some sort of a safety net, because if something goes wrong, sometimes things go wrong, what to do, right? You don't want to be in a position there is nothing you can do, so you want to be able to revert back. You probably want to test it as well. So if you can create a copy of your production environment on both sides, and then test your migration plan, that's probably the ideal scenario. The next thing that you also want to think about, this one is easier to explain by an example. So back in 2012, I think, I was doing a migration project of AD. And we got to a point where we migrated a user object from environment A into forest B. The project migrates, the object migrates, but for some reason out of the, let's say, 30 attributes that were populated on the original side, only 20 show up. So for some reason, we can't migrate those other 10 attributes, and we go crazy trying to understand why those 10 specifically are not migrating. Long story short, after a few days, we realized that the problem was not the migration. It was migrating. There was a policy on the other side that was taking those attributes and clearing those. But we spend a lot of time trying to understand what is causing it. My point there is that you want to have visibility into how your migration process looks like and what's happening actually in reality. So you want something that can say on both sides, is this object being modified by something? If yes, by what? Because that can answer the question of why. So to summarize it all, you want to have vulnerability scanning and understanding of the potential vulnerabilities that you might be exposing your organization to, and ideally you want to fix those ahead of time. You want to have a safety net, so if something goes wrong, you have the ability to bounce back. You want to test your migration in a production-like environment as close as possible, ideally the exact production. And you want to have as much visibility as possible into what is actually happening during the migration process.
No, that's great. Thank you very much, Mickey. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. So this is Sean Metcalf with Security Weekly. Please visit securityweekly.com/SemperisBH to learn more about Semperis. Apologies, Mickey. And we will be back with more interviews. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. This is Mandy with Pulse Security Weekly, joining you from Las Vegas. And today we are very happy to welcome Matthias Vallentin from Tenzir. Matthias, welcome.
Thanks. Great to be on the show.
So glad you're here. Have you had a successful Black Hat experience so far?
So far, yeah. It's been pretty smooth, surprisingly. Great event, awesome. Very big this year. It's exciting.
Fantastic. Well, I know that you're here releasing a new product. You're launching a new tool, and that is what I'd really like to find out about. So, do you want to give a real quick summary?
Yeah, so basically the elevator pitch is Tenzir, we are bringing open source security data pipelines to market. And I'm happy to tell you more about that later, what that actually means. But you can think of it as a mechanism to acquire, enrich, route security data, get it from A to B, and that's a primitive that's very important to accomplish things like building a security data lake and implementing a scalable detection and response architecture. So it's really a building block of what we also call the modern security data stack.
And from what I've reviewed, your platform is very customizable. But going into that, like what now drives such heavy use of data in cybersecurity operations?
So I think this is evolutionary across a lot of verticals. More and more digitization drives more and more data producers. The amount of data we at the other end then consume is just exponentially skyrocketing since years. This is unchanging. The tools we have built a decade ago, and in the past a lot of the processing and the analytics happened in the SIM. They have not been built for this data volume. They're basically collapsing under the load. It's not economically feasible to build everything on top of the older tools, and so people are struggling with the sheer volume at the moment to accomplish meaningful things. And along with that, the threat landscape is evolving. Attackers get smarter, more access to more data. So there's always, we have to be smarter in our detections to find them, and that requires more data. So that's, I think, these are two in combination are the main drivers for the need to process more data.
Absolutely. And being able to use more data, and really, like what I'm hearing and what you're saying is trying to help people understand that the current architecture and the current way the infrastructure was done for cybersecurity operations will never catch up.
This is difficult, yes. These legacy technologies, they're not built, simply. They have been built for different use case, for small amounts of data. And that's why we see people shifting basically their attention to more and more heavy-duty data tools, but that requires a lot of skills to customize this for the security workloads. So we always have this dichotomy between the data world, which they have a lot of horsepower in their tooling, but they lack the security-specific use cases, the ability to solve these problems that security has. And that transition from data to security, that requires a lot of data engineering. And that is not a skill that a lot of organizations have that come from a perspective where they need to solve security problems.
And so would you say then that that is the greatest challenge facing security teams currently?
Yes, security teams don't have data engineers like by default. That's usually a different skill. And so it's finding these data engineers that also understand security is even a rarer breed. So there's really a lack there because the current tools don't work very well, and building your own is something that's quite cost intensive. So there's really a gap right now in the market, and that's why we see a lot of people coming up with custom in-house solutions again. And so that's kind of that eye of the storm is right where we focus with our approach.
And does that go into, or will you explain a little bit more about SecDevOps?
So I think you mean SecDataOps.
SecDataOps, yes,
SecDataOps is really an operating model. And I think that it's important to understand that this is not a market segment or something as new trying to kind of place itself next to well-established categories of tools, but it's rather a way to think about leveraging the data to build out security use cases from a data flow perspective, thinking of how do you get something done, for example, like implementing live threat detection with your own security content, and as a first level, and then the next level also taking that security content to apply it retroactively. And these like a very standard use case when you build out a part of a large enterprise SOC or an MSSP or an MDR. And if you start thinking from a data flow perspective, what data do I need to accomplish this, and where does the visibility data arrive, or how does it need to be processed, reshaped in order to get to the next steps that I can apply my own security content to it, my threat intelligence, my IOCs, my observables, whatever I have, my Sigma rules, maybe more elaborate contents, potentially even ML models, anything that for me, I use the term security content to summarize everything that I can deploy on the visibility event data that in the traditional world would just end up in the SIM. And that's not, right now, that's not where you can build advanced workflows. So there's basically Sec Data Ops is a way to think about this data as a pipeline, different individual steps from data acquisition, going from there to the next step, enriching, aggregating it, bringing it down, deduplicating it, maybe applying an event taxonomy like OCSF so that you can standardize downstream detection analytics from the data collection. So in the part that was something that SIM owned, both the data acquisition and the analytics. And so I think that dependency is pretty strong, and security teams right now are looking to decouple this, to make it more modular, reusable, and that is something, when you start looking at the data flows, that's where you can draw these lines and in the middle of the individual sequences in the data flow. And that then, apply an event taxonomization, event taxonomy, like ECS is pretty common, OCSF, and there's ASIM, there's dozens, I think, out there. And that's just one of many steps. Then the next step would be finding, when you have a custom tool, let's say you want to deploy a machine learning model, then, well, it needs to have the data in a certain way so that you can bring it there. So,
but if I may, in what you're explaining and the usefulness for the security teams, it sounds as though you're saying, with the inundation of data that must be wrangled in order to have a successful threat hunting team and campaign, that what Tenzir is focusing on is not just a technology problem. Because part of what I'm hearing in the Sec Data Ops and bringing in the data engineering side, that you're trying to boost the people who are tasked with aggregating all the data, sorting it, storing it, using it correctly. You're helping bring them into a developer, like more of a developer mindset, even if that's not what they came from.
Yes, I think that's really where the skills gap is. Security people are not data engineers. And security, they have the right ideas, like I want my data to be in this shape. But then executing on that is usually, that's when, when it's not the case, the data's not yet there, and that's rough, because then they have to start coding, start developing, and that's a very different skill set. We want the analysts to stay in their ability to think about the threats, express dependencies there from a data perspective at high level, and quickly make these adjustments to the data as they need. And so that's really this, some call it midstream part in the data stack, that glue that holds it together. When you have actually the data, you have the analytic, and you just want to make the two work together. So that basically operationalization of your detection is a big challenge, and that's what we solve with this Sec Data Ops principle, by reducing the friction there.
Well, and it seems like not only reducing the friction, but also reducing the costs that are involved.
Ultimately, I think the ability to have processing outside of the SIM is a huge opportunity to save costs. Like there's especially the volume-based pricing that still dominates. We have opportunity to bring out workloads from the SIM and move them closer to the source, move them midstream. One example would be indicator matching. That's something. The data you have in the SIM might actually just be a subset, first of all, because of cost reasons, but you may want to apply your IOC matching on the full scope. So there's not just a benefit in terms of cost savings, but you also get more breadth when you can run your IOCs on all types of events, security events. And so that's a very it's a simple use case, because it's just, say, a very dumb operation. It's just a lookup of a piece of data. It's not complex as a neural network or something.
But it's so composable. It's so, from what I have reviewed, it is very customizable. So it is very, for the security practitioner that recognizes they don't have the data engineering background inside, being able to take it and apply it with a very similar structure to using pipes in Linux, or using, having that plug and play availability as Sec Data Ops is bringing up. I feel like that's also empowering the security practitioners much more quickly and in a much more agile way.
Right, I think so.
Like
we haven't
future-proofing
you just mentioned the magic word, pipelines. I think that is really the way we express Sec Data Ops. So for us, those security data pipelines are the vehicle to implement your use cases. And as you said, it's a very modular approach. Like a pipeline consists of a set of operators. Between operators flows the data. And if I can just take a module out there, like, for example, threat intelligence matching as one operator of the pipeline, it's like, quickly taking the things you want and being done. And there's not a lot of development or headbanging involved to get your data into the right shape. It's just there. It's a set of building blocks, and you can build larger use cases out of that. So that's our abstraction that we find fits very well, and security people understand it very well.
Absolutely. And in about 30 seconds, could you summarize about nodes in the data fabric?
Yeah, well, that's now is fast forwarding basically. How do you deploy Tenzir? Tenzir.
What you want to know?
yes, that makes a lot of sense. So basically, in a Tenzir architecture, you deploy nodes. The nodes are hosts for pipelines, and you can span pipelines between nodes to create a data fabric. That's the essence.
Awesome. And the nodes being so flexible, I mean, that's just beautiful in my eyes. It is beautiful. Even I highly suggest reviewing the website and the blog posts. To anyone out there who's listening and considering using this tool, I definitely recommend the documents and everything that was on the website. So, real quick, will you recap for us? You're here launching a new product. What is it and who is it for?
Right. So we're launching Tenzir as our product.
Okay.
It's security data pipelines. We are open source company that sets us apart.
Yes.
It is really for anybody who has a large SOC, builds an MDR, has an MSSP, wants to get security data from A to B, quickly operationalize it, get useful value out of it, ultimately, and then save costs on their existing tooling, get the SIM costs under control. There's a lot of workloads you can get out there. And so that's, in a nutshell, where we're trying to enter into the market.
Fantastic, and a lot of great information for the decision makers. And I really like the idea of being able to future-proof security operations as data aggregation and every part of it continues to be a day in, a day in and day out consideration for security operations. Thank you, Matthias, for joining us very much.
Pleasure to have that conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And on behalf of Pulse Security Weekly and Security Weekly here in Las Vegas, I'm Mandy. Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone, again. I'm Bill Brenner from Cyber Risk Alliance and Security Weekly, and we're continuing our coverage from Black Hat 2023. And I'm pleased to be here with Richard Yu, Senior Director of Product Management Security at Edgio. Welcome.
Thanks for having me here, Bill.
How's your week so far?
It was great. Busy week. Met a lot of people, a lot of great folks at the conference.
Very good. So let's dive right in. So let's start, if you can, walk me through what you see as the most important trends right now in API security, and what you think the biggest challenges are for online businesses in that area today.
Yep, absolutely. You know, when it comes to API, you know, I would like to tell people, you know, our world nowadays runs on API. You know, if you have a phone, most of your API runs, like most of your applications runs on API. If you have an IoT at home, which, I mean, who knows, your coffee pot most likely runs on API. I mean, hey, there's a HTTP status code just for teapot, right? But what the most important trend, when it comes to API security, I would say is definitely on the visibility and visualization part. As we always say, you can't really defeat anything that you can't see, right? When it comes to threat. So this is really something that has become more and more important for a lot of the organization we spoke with, especially for the lack of the visibility of like what kind of zombie API that's out there in the system.
Yeah, we did some research a few months back on third-party risks, and what you just said is exactly what a majority of survey respondents came back with. It's all about the visibility. So many APIs are created
right
just during the course of the day, doing business and working with third-party systems, that how do you keep track of them all?
Right.
So with that said, you've mentioned in the past, you've talked about being holistic with your solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but talk about how it's different from point solutions as people are familiar with them today.
Right. So I'd first like to kind of like let's define that, right? Yep. So when we say point solutions, we usually means a specific capability that is designed to deal with a specific problem. Now that by itself is actually great. When you have specific problems and all you need to just solve that problems, it's actually perfect, right? However, when it comes to security, things aren't often that easy. Especially, let's say you look at API issues, you can look at botnet issue. Sometimes we need to have a multiple layers of solutions that actually work together, to help solve that problems for the customers, for our users, right? And this speaks to the concept defense in depth. I know it's probably a buzzword by now, but it's very important to understand that defense in depth, the concept of defense in depth, is that no single layer of specific solutions should be considered a silver bullet to solve a particular issues, right? So when you deal with a particular issues, you want to make sure that you have multiple layers of, let's say even with DDoS protections, you can actually utilize specialized DDoS mitigation solutions with firewall, for example, to actually provide. It's all about reducing the numbers and the probability of breach by having each layers serve as the filters, right, to manage the risks.
Yep. So let's talk about the value proposition of the Edgio approach. So walk me through what you see as the pillars and how it fits together.
Right. So what we usually do, I like to generally describe that using like the NIST framework, but I'm going to simplify that, right? Obviously in a lot of organizations they focus on prevention. Like a lot of like NIST framework, there's prevention, right? But we see that we want to help customers not just bolster the preventions, but also provides them the capability to respond, right? You have detect and response. You want to provide the ability to detect and respond, because there are things like 0 days. I mean, that's much of a prevention that you put in, right? You're still going to have to react very quickly. What Edgio do, it's like through our holistic security, right? We aim to actually help customers, increase their mean time to response, as well as we call it time to mitigate, times to resolutions on any issues, by providing the solutions, the capability, and the services to really help them close their gap when it comes to the ability to have visibility when it comes to detection, as well as the ability to respond to any issues.
Yeah. So you've answered some of this already, but just for the sake of getting more and more specific, the trend in the industry is to consolidate solutions, technologies, but how do enterprises know what to do next in terms of architecting a more streamlined cybersecurity infrastructure and connect that with where Edgio comes in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So this ties to probably the first questions you have, is the difference between a point solutions and a holistic solutions. Because what we find with working with a lot of organizations is that they're having to stitch together a lot of solutions, not just from a security perspective, but also on the performance perspective. It's that, and that generally generated a lot of what we call NFR, non-functional requirement. In order to improve your performance, in order to improve your security, you also have to worry about how scalable this is. Is this going to cause a single point of failure? I have to spend 2-3x the amount of time trying to work on a failback policy, etc. What we try to advocate for a customer is to have a seamless way to use a platform that just natively stitch all of this together. So imagine if you can run your API security, your DDoS protection, your bot defense, all within one software stack, within a platform. Would you rather run it across 3 different separate proxy where you pass traffic from one to another? So this is where we come in. This is where we help our customers enhance their efficiency while trying to achieve and improve their security posture. And by doing that, you also you technically reduce the surface area. By doing that, you actually reduce the risk of unnecessary availability issues, and part of the CIA triad.
Very good. So, with the market moving towards edge security to protect web applications, what are some of the different components? Zero trust is something that gets thrown around a lot, but let's talk about other things. Talk about what you see as the essential components, and from there, if you are the potential customer coming to Edgio and you're really trying to get a fix on whether this fits for your environment, and I'm speaking as the customer who's starting to think through these things, what are the big questions that they should be coming to you and asking to get to that answer of how Edgio can fit into my unique environment?
Right. So, I generally expect a few questions from customers. So from, first of all, the ease of implementations. I strongly believe that a good security systems needs to be easy to use. A secure solutions is easy to use. People are generally lazy.
Yeah.
If you have to jump through hoops to make yourself secure, there's less probability of you doing that. Customers generally also concerned, hey, is this going to cause additional issues from form of reliability and performance? Now that's very important, right? We always like to tell our customers, right? There's technically no such thing as 100% security. Honestly, that's not something that will guarantee, and anyone can guarantee, because to me, 100% security means 0% functionality. I didn't come up with that. I stole it from the great Dr. Eric Cole.
Yes.
So one of the things that we always have to strike a balance, right? We want to improve security, but customers also concerned that you want to do it while actually making your site faster. And actually, so you don't actually have to pay the performance cost.
Make the site faster and stay out of the user's way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. The UX is very important. So how do you actually secure customers while actually making them faster, not just in the performance, but also making customers' teams work faster, improve their team velocity? This is why Edgio, when it comes to Edgio application platform, we pride ourselves for helping customers around these 3 pillars: performance, security, and developer velocity. Everything we try to do is to ensure that things are easy to use and you get the added benefits of improving performance. And this applies to all of the security features that we have today, and also any new additional capability such as zero trust access that we might be adding onto our platform in the future.
Perfect. Well, I wish you much success this week as we go through. We're at Wednesday right now, so as we go through the week, I hope you have a lot of great conversations with clients and prospects, and thanks for coming on.
All right, thanks for having me here. Have a good day.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And we are back, continuing our live coverage from Black Hat USA 2023 here at Mandalay Bay. And it's my pleasure to be joined with Antonio Sanchez. I can't seem to talk today. So you're the principal evangelist at Fortra. Glad to have you here. And let me just dive right in, because one of the subjects that's really near and dear to my heart is vulnerability management, because I've been, in one way or another, writing about it or editing about it or researching about it for the better part of 20 years. And for all of our advancements over the years, it continues to be a moving target. So my question for you is, why is vulnerability management such a challenge, particularly in today's climate?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me today. Vulnerability management has been around a long time. And even though it's been around a long time, you'd figure by now we would get it right, or get it pretty close to being right, but it is a moving target, and it goes back to the threat landscape. I'm sure you've seen this. It is by far just changing so fast and so rapidly. There's the footprint today is much different than what it was 20 years ago with the rapid adoption of the cloud. And every time you put your workloads out in other places, you have a whole new set of vulnerabilities to think about. And then there's always the new vectors, the new things that we hadn't thought about, that nobody really thought about until they became a thing. So there's always going to be vulnerabilities. There's always going to be software that's going to be created. Software inherently is going to have some bugs. You can't create perfect code. It's just not possible. But everywhere you turn, there's always going to be some sort of vulnerability, something out there. And then the hard part is, because of the volume of vulnerabilities, it's impossible to get to everything.
Yep.
So you've got to make some decisions. What can I get to? What can my staff get to that's going to make the biggest impact? Because I'm not going to get to all 1,000 that I found this week.
Yeah.
I'm going to get to a fraction of those, and then there's going to be another 1,000 next week.
What's most important in your environment in terms of criticality is not the same as any number of other environments.
Exactly. And it's different for everybody. It's different because what's important to you may not necessarily be important to me, and people need to, I think that's kind of, when vulnerability management started, it was mostly vulnerability scanning, and it was vulnerability scanning for trying to find all the things to patch. Well, then we get into, okay, well, I can't patch everything. So what are the highest, the most critical things I should worry about patching? Okay, well, sometimes the most critical things that you have may not necessarily be a critical asset that you need to patch. So it goes back to understanding, what do I have in my environment? What's important to me? And then from what I find, this is where some of the intelligence comes in, and why vulnerability that's evolved from being scanning to management to even assessments, is putting some intelligence behind what are the things that matter to my business, what are the business drivers, what are the growth drivers, how are people handling data, how's data coming in, how do we make money, and then making decisions based on these assets are critical for us, so anything that comes up we have to prioritize with this, and at the end of the day you want to focus your resources that are on the things that are going to make the biggest impact for your organization. And it's as true now as it was 20 years ago as it will be 5, 10, 15 years ago, because there's always going to be that next thing.
Yeah. Now, in following you and Fortra, I've heard you talk elsewhere about the importance of thinking like a threat actor.
Mm-hmm.
Spend a couple minutes now talking me through what that looks like.
So you've heard the phrase, layers of defense, and ensuring that you have multiple security controls across the organization, across the kill chain. And too often times what we find is organizations thinks I've got all of my security controls, I'm actively reducing my footprint, but sometimes what they don't think about is, okay, how would I attack me, or how would somebody attack me? And if they attacked me, what could they do? How would they get in? And once they're in, what are the things they can do? Where can they move laterally? Can they get to the crown jewels of my organization or not? And so when we say thinking like a threat actor, it's being able to track the tactics, techniques, and the procedures, the TTPs on what is it that the threat actors are doing. Because the threat actors are always evolving. For every innovation that comes out to improve the efficacy of security, the threat actors are using them as well to figure out how can they implement that in with their attacks. So thinking like a threat actor is just that, is if an adversary was to get in, what could they do and what could they get to, and how detrimental and how critical would that be for our organization?
So can you give an example of a case where you helped a client address these issues and harden their defenses and restructure using Fortra? Can you give an example of a case where you did that and what it looked like?
So one of them that comes to mind, so we were working with a national manufacturing organization. They're mature practices. They do internal penetration testing, but as part of their security program, they also once a year bring in a third party to do their own penetration testing. So a year ago when they did it, they had another company did it, and they fared actually pretty well with whatever third party they used the year prior. So this year they used Fortra, which within our portfolio, it's the product is called Core Impact. It's a service that we provide for customers. So this was the first time that they contracted us to do the pen testing for them and see what would happen. Our pen testing team, our team that did the pen testing was able to harvest about 900 credentials, many of them admin credentials. It was to the point where they could have literally taken over the manufacturing company's entire domain. So you can imagine once their jaw dropped, metaphorically, and once they realized like, oh my gosh, this is both very scary, but at the same time, it was eye-opening. I said, well, I'm glad that they did that in a safe environment, being us doing it for them, because this way they could figure out exactly what they needed to do to harden that environment, because we provided them the report of this is how we got in, this is how we got the first set of credentials, then this is how we moved laterally, then this is we got other credentials, and the different steps along the way, so that this gave the organization the opportunity to understand, okay, this is what we need to do to harden this environment, this is what we need to do to update this configuration, this is what we need to do to update permissions, and so on and so forth, to reduce that. Because had that happened and an adversary have done that, it literally would have put them out of business, having their entire domain taken down.
Yeah. So with vendor consolidation at the top of many a CISO's mind these days, that's what comes up repeatedly as I talk to CISOs. What can Fortra do to help mature? And some of this you've already described, but this is to really tie it all together. What can Fortra do to help mature organization security programs?
Sure. At the end of the day, it's being able to stitch and integrate the solutions together and to become a force multiplier for the organizations, because the organizations, the talent shortage isn't going away anytime soon. So the products, the tools have to do more. And what we've been hearing, and I'm sure you've been hearing it as well, is customers buy best of breed of everything, but then they're left figuring out how to stitch everything together. And in the end, they only end up using 5 to 10% of the capacity of multiple tools. So what we've done with our portfolio is we've purchased several companies and their intellectual property, and we've integrated. We're integrating all the places where it makes sense to integrate, to make it easier for the customers to deploy, to make it easier to manage, to make it easier to be able to solve some difficult, complex use cases cases, and that's the strategy that we're going to continue moving forward, is do the integration, do the stitching for the customer, so wherever they are within their security maturity, we have something that can help them along the way. Because as you know, security is not a destination, it's a journey. So we want to be, we say we want to be their security ally, and we're that's what we want to be, is we want to help you on that journey. Let us be one of your allies, one of your partners on that journey with the breadth of portfolio and the integrations. Let us do the hard part, which is stitching these solutions together to solve those complex use cases.
Excellent. So that was great. Thank you. I wish you lots of success this week in your discussions. And we will be back.
Great. Thank you for having me.
And we are back, continuing our live Security Weekly coverage from Black Hat 2023 here at Mandalay Bay. Hope you're all having a great day. I am very pleased to be joined by Randy Watkins, CTO of Critical Start, and we're going to have a conversation now about MDR, about MCRR. And so let me go right in, because MDR has been a huge topic so far in 2023 when it comes to our audience and what they're interested in. And so when looking at the key differentiating factors among MDR providers, what should organizations be considering? What are the questions they need to ask themselves about their environment before making a choice?
That's a great question. So MDR is definitely a big piece of a lot of organizations' security infrastructure now, and it has a lot of benefits. Most organizations are using it for staff augmentation to really boost their internal resources, because everybody's suffering from the resource gap. Looking at how do you adopt and get the most utilization out of your MDR, things like tech stack, what kind of products have you already made investments in? How do you get more out of that investment? Where does your security team really need help filling gaps? And identifying how you would work in a third-party provider into your operations are definitely considerations that need to be taken into account. When looking at some specific MDR provider requirements, definitely making sure they align with that tech stack, looking at accountability, SLAs, how are they communicating with your team? How does your team work with them? And then really the overall value that you're expecting them to provide to your security posture. Really some things that most organizations kind of take into account when they head into it. But if they're not thinking about that, I mean, that's definitely where I would start. Tech stack alignment, and how are you going to operationalize that MDR inside of your environment?
And how it aligns with what your business's priorities are.
Yeah, so I mean, business priorities, honestly, is something should be taken into account. Just building out your security roadmap, building out your security strategy. MDR is typically a tactical fold into that security strategy, because most security organizations lack the resources to operationalize that investment on their own.
Yeah. So every solution has its challenges for some organizations for a variety of good reasons. Can you just go in a little bit on some of the common gaps, some of the common limitations that you've witnessed among your client base?
Yeah, I mean, MDR is pretty commoditized now. Mm-hmm. There's over 100 vendors out there that claim to do some level of MDR. So there's pluses and minuses across the board, and there's definitely an MDR out there for just about every organization. But looking across the spectrum and looking at what different MDRs offer, I mean, obviously that technology alignment. There are some MDR manufacturers that make their own technology, their own endpoint, their own SIM. There are some that leverage your existing investment. That's where Critical Start plays. We integrate tightly with Microsoft and Palo Alto and Sumo Logic and the like to really kind of drive the return on that investment. Other areas where you should definitely start evaluating or really place some emphasis: accountability, transparency. So are they doing what you're paying them to do, and how do you know it? Do they have contractual SLAs, or do they have kind of hopes and dreams, SLOs. And when you look at the SLAs too, I mean, one thing that we've seen is SLAs based on notification of alert, which seems a little odd. I mean, that's just an alert in and of itself. So SLAs around the true remediation, look for adherence to industry metrics like MTTD, MTTR. That's a pretty big differentiator. And then also the interaction between your team and the MDR, I think is critically important. How well do they fold into your business? How well can they wrap your business into their offering as opposed to cram your business into their box of an offering? MDRs are more or less flexible to like rules of engagement, how they respond. Some of them only make recommendations. And when you're looking at MDR, you're not looking for managed detection and recommendation. You're looking for managed detection and response. So making sure that that MDR provider actually responds and contains the threat 24/7, but also that it has definable rules of engagement. If you don't want them to isolate your CEO's laptop at 2 a.m, then you should be able to declare that out of bounds while still maintaining response capabilities across the rest of the environment to stop that threat from moving laterally.
Yep. So when I think of MDR, I tend to think about ransomware because usually the conversations I have are within that context. But the threats that MDR is designed to help address are much more than that. So what are some of the other things that are top of mind? And I'm going to throw in there, you know, when we look at where is the hype this year, it's all around AI, the good side of it and the bad side of it. And so what are your thoughts there?
Oh man, you can't walk down the hallway without hearing AI mentioned at least once or twice. I agree with you. A lot of times you think of threats, you think of ransomware. Ransomware absolutely is kind of the number one threat facing the industry from a tactical perspective. But what we're seeing, like patterns inside of ransomware, are pretty indicative of attacks broadly. So what we're seeing inside of ransomware is kind of a pullback from the spray and pray approach of ransomware, where we just launch it inside the environment and let it do its thing. What we're seeing more now is interactive attack behavior inside of the network before they launch ransomware. Ransomware is really just a parting gift. It's a thanks for having us. We'll see you next time. And that's what we're seeing with most attacks now. They're using law bins or live off the land binaries. They're kind of low and slow. They're living in the medium and low alerts. They're not setting off any big alarm bells until it's time to leave. And that's something that, another differentiator across MDRs, ask them how they're resolving alerts and what alerts they're resolving. We've always resolved every alert regardless of criticality. Different MDR players, your mileage may vary. But resolving all those medium and low alerts definitely helps us identify those low and slow attacks very early on in the kill chain or the attack framework, whatever you're kind of basing your security metrics on. AI, I think, just provides added speed, but really attacking a lot of the same vulnerabilities that we already get attacked through. So I think the AI for now is really just going to emphasize some of those vulnerabilities that need to be patched and need to be addressed with mitigating controls, because attackers are going to be able to hit them faster with more kind of a little bit more variation, but it's still going to be the same exploits. So really it comes down to doing the fundamentals correctly and looking at kind of posture more broadly.
So let's pivot now from MDR to managed cyber risk reduction. For those of you who are keeping track with acronyms, that's MCRR. Lots of alphabet soup in our industry.
Yes.
But talk about what that is as an evolution.
Yeah.
And what's the additional value that it provides.
So first of all, let me apologize for making another acronym in the alphabet soup of cybersecurity, but we did feel it was necessary. MDR, by its name, is very focused on detection and response. And we've done that for 8 years. Since before we had an acronym to link MDR to, we've been doing it. And we've always focused on reducing the most risk of any other MDR provider by having, resolving every alert in the 60-minute SLAs, contractual SLAs. But we wanted to do more, right? So as we start to operationalize the detection and response capabilities, organizations pivot their focus back to more proactive security controls, really looking at posture, exposure is all the buzz downstairs. And that's somewhere where we felt we could provide additional value, especially given all the visibility and expertise that we have in-house. So MCRR is really an expansion of MDR past the reactive controls and into the proactive posture. So now what we're looking to do is identify assets. Identify which assets aren't covered by your EDR product, which is the most valuable signal that an MDR will get. Look at driving better utilization out of your SIM platform by finding SIM coverage gaps where you may not be feeding the right log sources, or maybe they're disconnected or blocked. Doing things like vulnerability prioritization, linking that back to those assets that may be missing EDR coverage, and really trying to improve the posture and security maturity of the organization, increasing the resilience to attacks, and using MDR more as a backstop. It's still a foundational control of MCRR. It's still a kind of a pivotal service point, but it shouldn't be used as the first and last line of defense. So MCRR is really building up those proactive security controls, bolstering up the security maturity, and then having the detection and response for those targeted attacks that still get past the basic security controls. And then the other problem that we saw that we wanted to solve was, how do you measure this? And how do you prove to your board, how do you prove to your leadership team that the investment that they're making in detection and response, in managed cyber risk reduction, is truly returning? So we've also built in a risk assessment module that allows organizations to take CSF questionnaires or ISO questionnaires and kind of track their progress and their maturity over time so they can show that improvement. So to us, MCRR is the expansion beyond reactive security controls to address risk in a more holistic fashion and also measure the progress over time, so you can really show what your security organization is doing for the rest of the business and how much risk it's truly reducing on the organization's behalf.
So where does MCRR go from here? So what I mean by that is you've very clearly captured what it means in the present. Where do you see it evolving over the next 2 years?
Yeah, I definitely see more of the MDR players starting to form into the MCRR, and there are some that already have some of these capabilities, and they'll probably start identifying with this MCRR bucket. And from there, it's going to be an expansion into additional visibility and additional proactive controls. I think detection and response is pretty well handled at a face level, but once we start to bring in more signal, more telemetry, we can do more cross correlation to identify risky users on risky assets and then prioritize those for proactive controls while also monitoring them for potential reactive kind of detection and response scenario. We become much more powerful. I hate to use the buzzword, but there is a lot of synergy between the visibility that we get before there's an attack and the efficacy and efficiency of which we can detect and respond to an attack once we merge all those signals together. So I think, looking at vulnerabilities, looking at asset identification, EASM or attack surface management is absolutely going to fall into there. Attack path mapping, I think, has a valuable add-on to it. Breach and attack simulation certainly helps with controls validation. Controls validation in and of itself is probably due for a refresh. But combining all that together with the visibility from EDR, the new visibility that we're starting to get from different identity sources, response actions linked to identity and email, just makes for a more powerful and effective kind of security augmentation from a third-party provider, which a lot of organizations are going to have to look to for help as they continue to struggle with the headcount and expertise shortage that we're facing in security.
So in 2 years, we'll come back together and see how it all turned out compared to how we think it's going to go.
Yeah, hopefully we don't have to wait 2 years for our next conversation, but we'll definitely be talking more about MCRR in the future.
It will certainly a pleasure talking to you today. So hope you have a great rest of the week, and we will be back